Hello. In this video we're going to build on how to write to text files. And what we're going to do is we're going to take the technique we talked about in our last video and we're going to put it in a method. It makes perfect sense to put this in a method because in a program you might actually have to print to a text file at multiple times throughout the program. So if you put it in a method, you can just invoke that method and have the work done. It's going to simplify your code. Now you'll notice I have an error here, and that's because, remember, when I construct a file writer object, it might throw an exception, so I have to have throws IO exception. So just a reminder, to write to text files we use the file class, the file writer class, and the print writer class. We first create a file object, then we create a file writer object using that file object, and then we create a print writer object using the file writer object. To print to the file writer, we use the print writer and the command print line or method print line or print. And then when we close the print writer, what that does is takes the information in the file writer and transfers it into the file. Really important that you close the print writer when you're done, because if you don't, that information is not going to get transferred over. So let's comment this out. So slash star and star slash. A nice little trick a student suggested is you put two slashes in front of your star slash, and that means if you delete the top one, you can just run with it. If you don't have that slash slash, you'll get an error down at the bottom. Nice idea. So we've written a method called saveToFile. saveToFile takes three pieces of information. The first parameter tells us the name of the file we are using. Remember, if the file exists, it will just use that file. If it doesn't exist, it will create it for us. The second parameter is the text to be written to the file. So whatever I want to pass into that file. The third parameter is a Boolean. So one of the things that might happen is I might want to wipe out the file and start from scratch, or I might want to just add the text to what's already in there. So it turns out there's an interesting way to tell the file writer if you want to append the file or wipe out the file. So we need to provide a Boolean that says either true or false. False meaning start a new file, or not start a new file, delete the content first, and true saying append the file. So what we have here is, here's our method called saveToFile. We're gonna send it the string out2.txt, which will be our file. We're gonna print into that file hello everyone, and we're gonna set this to false. So watch, if I run this right now and I go here to out2, so introduction to files, there it is, out2.txt, hello everyone, there it is. If I run it again, it wipes out the file and prints hello everyone. That's because I have this false here. If I set this to true, which means append the file, it adds it to the bottom. So see that every time I run this now, let's run it there, I'm going to append the file, see? So if I come back here and I set this to false again, false meaning don't append the file, and I run this, deletes everything and starts again. So what this gives us the ability to do is to decide whether we want to add information to the file or start new. So let's take a look at how this works. So here's our method header. Don't forget your method header, it's really important. Here's our method header. And I've used a try-catch structure here. The reason why I've used a try-catch structure is because by keeping everything inside this method, I can try and handle the problem right here. If I throw the exception, it gets a little more tricky if I'm using this in a larger program with multiple methods. And let me just explain again why that is. So let's remove the try-catch here. And now I'm going to get an error from this line saying I might have an exception I need to handle. So we can write here throws IO exception. So now what happens is if something goes wrong, you throw the exception out and someone can handle it. The important thing to remember is that if your methods are always throwing the exception, it has to either be handled at some point, and if it's not handled by you, it will get handled when it eventually reaches out to the main method again. So every method between the main method and saveToFile has to throw IO exception now. So if I come up here, because the main method throws IO exception, I'm okay. But watch what happens when I delete that throws. I get an error. The error is because my method saveToFile is throwing the exception to the main method and saying deal with this. But the main method doesn't know how to deal with exceptions. It has to know to throw that exception out, and then it gets handled. So one of the things we want to do by writing this in a method is avoid throwing away the error. We want to deal with it right there. And to do that, we use a try-catch structure. And a try-catch structure simply says we put what we want to try inside the try part, and it's saying to the computer, hey, try this. And the catch is saying, if it fails, or if an exception is thrown at you, specifically an IO exception, do this. And I always like to put in here some sort of print. So system.out.println error saveToFile. So now I know where this error is occurring if this pops up. And the beautiful part of this now is I don't need to throw an exception anymore. So that means anyone can invoke this method and they don't have to deal with throwing the exception. Again, if you have 2 methods, it's easy to throw the exception. I want you to think about if you have 50 methods and you don't know who's calling what when necessarily. So let's just make sure we understand how this works. So I create my file object, I create my file writer object, but notice I'm using a slightly different constructor now. The constructor takes a file object, which I've constructed using that string that's passed, and it takes a boolean called reset. So if the boolean reset, if it's set to, actually, you know what? I'm going to correct this right in my video because this is about the 12th time I've tried to do this. Reset is not actually good as a name because true doesn't mean reset, true means append. So let's make this append. There we go. This is going to make more sense now. So if boolean append is true, that means I'm going to append the file or add to it. If it's false, it means I'm going to start brand new. I'm going to wipe out what's there and print to a fresh file. Then I create my print writer object using my file writer object. I print the text, and then I close the print writer. So what I can do now is, if I delete these, if I run this right now, it's going to say, hello everyone, and append is false, meaning don't append the file, start new. And then I call saveToFile and I pass it, this is wonderful. Append is true, meaning I am going to add to the file. And if we take a look in here, hello everyone, this is wonderful. If I come back here, I could set this, for example, a set append to false. And I could run this. And since append is false in the second one, it's going to wipe out the file when it does this. It's important to recognize that if I set these both to true, and this is the last point before I wrap this up, if I set these both to true, what then happens is every time I run the program, it's going to continually append to it. So if I run this, this is wonderful. If I run this, come back, there it is. If I run this, because I'm always appending the file, which if you have a game and you want to keep track of scores, but you want the scores every time the game is played, this would make sense because you just never wipe out that data. Anyways, there's lots of ideas here to explore and play around with. What's really important you remember is you have to make the code work for you. So don't just copy this and do this exactly as I set it up. Ask yourself, what do I need this to do? And then take this code and tweak it and play around with it. I hope this video helped.